I still remember the exact moment the invitation arrived. It was a dull Thursday afternoon, the kind where the sky hangs heavy with grey clouds and the hum of the city seems muffled by the drizzle. I was sitting by the window, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee, when the mail slot clicked. My name was scrawled in elegant, looping letters on a heavy cream envelope, sealed shut with a black wax stamp embossed with a symbol I didn't recognize, a twisted, looping design that seemed both archaic and deliberately unsettling. Curiosity overcame me as I broke the seal, unfolded the thick parchment, and read the invitation. It was an offer to participate in a new reality show called Rules for Surviving the Manor. The letter promised an experience like no other, a test of wit, courage, and endurance set within the sprawling confines of an ancient mansion. The prize was substantial, enough to change a life like mine, the kind of opportunity that makes you consider everything else you thought you knew about your limits. The instructions were sparse, but clear. Arrive at the address embedded within the letter by nightfall. The tone was formal, yet beneath the polished language was an undercurrent of something darker, something unspoken. I remember a line that chilled me. Each room enforces a rule. Break it, and the consequences are immediate. Despite the unease threading through my thoughts, I couldn't resist. The next evening, I found myself standing before the manor. It was larger than I expected, its silhouette jagged against the twilight. The walls, once proud and stately, were now worn and stained, vines clutching at crumbling stone. The windows were dark eyes, watching, unblinking. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of aged wood and forgotten secrets. The grand foyer stretched before me, its ceiling lost in shadow, chandeliers hanging like skeletal fingers. One by one, the other contestants arrived. Evelyn Crane, with her sharp, commanding presence, Marcus Lee, who seemed distracted by his gadgets, and Sophie Delgado, a quiet, watchful presence. We exchanged tentative greetings, each sizing up the others, the unspoken question hanging between us: why were we here? Then he appeared, Mr. Gray, the host. He was an unnerving figure, tall and thin, dressed immaculately in a dark suit and grey tie that seemed to absorb the pale light. His eyes were sharp, unreadable, and he spoke with a calmness that belied the gravity of his words. He laid out the rules with chilling precision. Each room in the manor had a single rule. Break it, and you would be instantly teleported to the basement, a place none of us had seen but all feared. The first room awaited us, its heavy oak door groaning as it opened. Inside, the dim flicker of candlelight revealed a space both elegant and oppressive. Painted on the far wall in faded gold leaf were the words, "Don't speak." The silence was suffocating. We moved cautiously, each step measured. Tensions mounted as nerves frayed. A whisper, a cough was all anyone could hear against the crushing quiet. Then, despite the warnings, a contestant broke the silence with a nervous question. In an instant, a flash of cold blue light engulfed them, and they vanished. The room fell into stunned silence. The rule was real. The consequences, immediate and terrifying. I swallowed hard, realizing this was no ordinary game. The prize was overshadowed by the fear of what awaited those who failed. And as the door closed behind us, sealing our fate, I knew that the manor was watching, waiting for the next mistake. The night stretched on, each heartbeat pounding loud in the stillness. I was trapped in a game where silence was survival, and every breath could be the last. What had I gotten myself into? And more importantly, how long could I keep quiet? As the first chapter of my ordeal ended, the mansion's shadows seemed to deepen, whispering secrets I was only beginning to understand. The rules were simple: But the game was far from straightforward. Somewhere within these walls, the true horror awaited, patient, inevitable, and merciless. And I was just getting started. The door groaned shut behind us, swallowing the faint light from the hallway. Instantly, the world collapsed into darkness, so complete it felt like a physical weight pressing against my skin. No flashlights, no phones, no visible source of light, just an abyss where the faintest sound echoed like thunder. A low hum, almost a whisper, seemed to ripple through the air, twisting and curling around us like smoke. "Remember," the host's voice slithered from the shadows beyond the doorway. "The rule here is simple. Don't look." I swallowed hard, feeling the pulse in my throat quicken. The other contestants shuffled nervously beside me. Mara's breath hitched. Ila's low chuckle sounded strained in the darkness. The silence was thick, filled with tension, punctuated only by the soft scrape of shoes on cold stone. "Don't look," Mara repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "We can't afford to slip up." "Easy to say," Eli scoffed, his voice rough. "How do you even know where to go if you can't see?" I tried to steady my breathing, reminding myself of the rules from the last room. "Don't speak" nearly cost us all. Now, the game was twisting again, demanding something even harder: to move through a place without sight. The walls pressed inward, as if the darkness itself was narrowing the space around us. We stepped forward cautiously, guided only by the faintest sensation of air shifting past our skin. The whispers grew louder, fragments of words teasing at the edge of hearing, but never coalescing into anything solid. I could feel Mara's eyes darting, if not physically, then through some heightened sense, searching for clues, for threats. "I don't like this," she murmured, reaching out instinctively to steady herself on the wall. "It's like the house is alive." "It is," a voice answered from the darkness. It was Eli, though his tone was different, strained, nervous, and it's watching. The oppressive silence was shattered when a sharp gasp cut through the air. I spun toward the sound, heart hammering, but the darkness offered no answers. A flash of light, brief, cruel, flickered near Eli's position, then nothing. He was gone. "Eli," Mara shouted, panic creeping into her voice. We strained our ears, but only the whispering remained, cold and unyielding. I swallowed a scream, feeling the icy fingers of dread curl around my spine. The rules weren't just abstract commands, they were death sentences. Breaking them meant disappearance, teleportation to some grim basement we could only imagine. "We have to keep moving," I said, forcing my voice steady. "We can't let fear break us." But Mara shook her head, voice trembling. "How do we survive when we can't see? How do we trust each other when all we have are whispers and shadows?" The game was shifting beneath our feet. The logic we clung to was unraveling. And I realized the greatest danger wasn't just the rules, it was the paranoia they bred, the fractures they forced between us. I gripped the rough stone wall, feeling the cold seep into my palm, grounding me. I couldn't look, I couldn't speak, but I had to survive. Somehow, as the darkness stretched on, swallowing every step, every breath, I knew one thing with terrible clarity: this was only the beginning. The whispers seemed to grow louder, almost beckoning, as if the house itself was hungry for us to break, to look, to fail. And I was terrified of what would happen if I did. The heavy oak door groaned shut behind us, sealing the exit with a sound that reverberated like a death knell. The third room lay before us, a dismal chamber shrouded in muted grey light that seemed to leach the color from everything it touched. The walls, cracked and stained with age, bore the faint scent of mildew and forgotten time. At the center, a large, cracked mirror hung crookedly. its fractured surface catching the dull light and reflecting distorted images of the four of us, Mara, Eli, the host, and me. Written in jagged black letters across the mirror was the rule for this chamber: don't touch. The words seemed less a warning and more a decree etched into the very air, heavy with implication. I swallowed hard, already feeling the weight of the house's gaze upon us. Mara's eyes flicked to the mirror, then back to me, a flicker of something unreadable passing through her sharp gaze. Eli shifted nervously beside her, his thin fingers twitching like restless insects. The host, ever composed, stood slightly apart, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hood. A sudden draft stirred the air, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of dust and old wood. It whispered through the room, setting the cracked floorboards to creaking beneath our feet. The silence was absolute, broken only by the soft, uncertain breaths we each took. I felt my skin prickle, every nerve on edge. The rule was simple, yet impossibly cruel. Don't touch. It wasn't just about restraint, it was about control, about submitting to the game's shifting logic, even when it made no sense. As we moved cautiously through the room, Mara's eyes never stopped scanning, her posture taut as if ready to spring. Eli's desperation was palpable. His hand brushed against the sleeve of his jacket, then quickly pulled back as if the slightest contact might doom him. Minutes stretched like hours. The oppressive stillness pressed in, and every accidental brush against a surface felt like a betrayal. Then it happened. Eli's foot caught on a loose floorboard, sending his body swaying. In an attempt to steady himself, his hand grazed the edge of a dusty table. A flash of blinding light erupted, searing my retinas. When the light faded, Eli was gone. Silence swallowed the room again, but it was a different silence, now one thick with shock and unspoken fear. Mara's lips parted in a silent gasp, her eyes wide with disbelief. I felt my own heart hammering, a frantic drumbeat in the stillness. The host's calm voice finally broke through the haze. Rule broken. Punishment administered. No one moved, no one spoke. The game had claimed another. Days or maybe hours passed in a blur. The mansion seemed to tighten around us, its breath cold and unforgiving. Mara and I exchanged fewer words, the growing strain between us palpable. Her glances were sharp, calculating, and I caught the subtle twitch of her fingers more than once, a silent threat lurking in the gesture. Trust was a fragile thing here. It cracked and shattered more easily than the mirror's surface. One evening, as the dim light waned, I found Mara standing alone in a narrow corridor, her hands hovering dangerously close to the peeling wallpaper. Our eyes met, and in that instant, I saw the betrayal unfold. She was about to break the rule herself. I tried to warn her, but the words caught in my throat. The mansion's silence was unforgiving. A sudden flash, a sharp crack, and Mara vanished as Eli had. The air grew heavier, the shadows darker. I was alone. The realization hit me like a wave. No more allies, no more distractions. Just me, the mansion, and the oppressive silence. The walls seemed to pulse, the floorboards groaned beneath my feet, and the stale air whispered secrets I wasn't meant to hear. I felt the weight of the house's gaze, cold and unyielding. I moved forward, hesitant, every step echoing in the cavernous emptiness. The shattered mirror reflected only me, now a solitary figure trapped in a game with no end. The rule was clear: don't touch. But the mansion's cruelty was far from over. As I pressed my palm lightly against the cracked glass, the surface rippled like water, and a voice, soft, distant, and chilling, whispered, "Last to remain." And I knew Survival here meant more than obeying rules. It meant confronting the darkness within and without. In a game where logic shifted like sand, and betrayal was the only certainty. The mansion waited. And so did I. The door creaked open ahead, revealing a dimly lit corridor that seemed to stretch endlessly. My breath caught in my throat. This was no longer a challenge, it was a descent. I stepped forward, the silence swallowing me whole. The game was just beginning. I had never felt so utterly alone. The mansion stretched endlessly before me, its walls breathing with a slow, sinister rhythm. Each creak and groan seemed to echo the pounding of my heart, and the silence was pierced only by the faintest, most unsettling sound, whispers. They came from below, from the basement where the others had vanished. At first, I thought I imagined them fragments of memory, the residue of fear clinging to the shadows. But the whispers grew clearer, more insistent, like voices trapped behind a veil of darkness. I pressed my ear against the cold wooden floor, straining to catch the words. They were broken, disjointed snatches of names. Please, warnings, don't trust, don't look. Remember, the voices flickered like a candle's flame, never steady, always just out of reach. I staggered back, breath hitching, as the weight of their meaning settled on me. The basement was no mere punishment. Chamber it was a prison for lost minds, a limbo for those who had broken the rules. The house itself seemed alive, twisting the air around me. I reached out to steady myself against a nearby wall, but the surface rippled like water. My reflection caught in a cracked mirror, warped and distorted. The face staring back was mine, but unrecognizably sunken features melting into shadows. I blinked, and the image shifted, turning into a grotesque mask of fear. Was I losing myself? The mansion's logic was unraveling, bending reality into something cruel and incomprehensible. I tried to hold on to what I knew, each rule, each moment, each face, but my mind betrayed me. I sat down heavily, pulling a scrap of paper and a pen from my pocket. My hands trembled as I scribbled names and rules, the ink smearing beneath my fingers like it had a will of its own. Thoughts slipped through my consciousness like water through fingers, memories fading as if erased by an unseen hand. The new rules had taken hold. Don't think, don't remember. How could I fight a game that attacked my very mind? The whispers from the basement grew louder, sharper. One voice broke through the haze, clear and chilling. Remember why you came. The words echoed in the hollow chambers of my mind, igniting a spark of defiance. I had come here seeking something: fame, fortune, or perhaps just a thrill. But now, trapped alone in this nightmare, I realized the true purpose was darker, more twisted than I could have imagined. I forced myself to stand, heart hammering in my chest. The mansion's oppressive atmosphere pressed down, but I would not yield. I had to uncover the secrets hidden beneath the surface, to understand the rules that bent reality and shattered minds. The game was no longer just about survival. It was about reclaiming my identity from the shadows threatening to consume me. As I moved deeper into the mansion's labyrinthine halls, the whispers followed, a constant reminder of those lost below. Each step was a battle against the growing madness, every breath a defiance against the silence imposed. The house was changing, shifting, warping around me, but I clung to the fragile thread of sanity. I paused before a door I had never noticed before, its surface carved with symbols that seemed to pulse with a faint, eerie glow. Beyond it lay the basement, the place of punishment and whispers. My fingers brushed the cold handle, and a chill ran through me. Could I face what lay beneath? Could I confront the voices of the broken, the remnants of those who had failed the rules? The mansion awaited my choice, its cruel logic bending and twisting with every heartbeat. I understood now. The rules were not just constraints. They were weapons, designed to fracture the mind and trap the soul. But I would not be their next victim. With a breath steadying my nerves, I pushed open the door and stepped into the darkness, ready to uncover the truth. The whispers surged into a cacophony, voices overlapping, pleading, mocking. My skin prickled with fear, but beneath it burned a fierce determination. The game had changed. So had I. And I would survive not just the rules, but the mansion's very soul. The basement's cold embrace swallowed me whole, but in the depths of that darkness, I found a sliver of light, the knowledge that the only way out was to face the shadows within and without. The game's cruel heart beat steadily, but I was no longer afraid. The whispers would guide me or destroy me. Either way, I was ready. I stood motionless, the cold stone floor pressing against the soles of my shoes, the rule ringing relentlessly in my mind, "Don't move." The mansion around me was no longer a static structure, but a living, breathing entity that twisted and turned with malicious intent. The walls groaned softly, a subtle but unmistakable sound of ancient mechanisms grinding beneath layers of dust and decay. Light flickered, unreliable and feeble, barely illuminating the narrow corridor where I had found myself trapped. The first time I noticed the shift, it was the subtle slide of a panel beside me, moving imperceptibly until it locked into a new position. I blinked, trying to convince myself that it was a trick of the light or my imagination running wild after days of isolation and stress. But the evidence was undeniable. The mansion was rearranging itself. Hallways warped, doorways appeared and vanished, and angles bent in ways that made my head spin. I dared not move. The rule was clear, and the consequences had become terrifyingly real. Each step risked instant teleportation to the basement. A fate I had learned to dread from the whispered stories of those who had vanished before me. My breath slowed, and I focused on the coldness of the floor beneath me. The rough texture of the peeling wallpaper, the faint sense of mildew and aged wood. Every sense was heightened, every sound amplified in the oppressive silence that the mansion forced upon me. Time lost meaning. Minutes stretched into hours, or so it felt, as I remained frozen in place. The mansion's shifting maze was a cruel paradox. To survive, I had to resist the instinct to move, to adapt, to seek escape. But the corridors themselves seemed to conspire against me. A faint creak beneath my feet made my heart lurch. The floor trembled, subtle vibrations rippling outward like a warning. I swallowed hard, muscles rigid, eyes darting to the shadows that stretched and recoiled with the flickering chandelier above. The shadows were more than just the absence of light. They seemed alive, twisting into grotesque shapes that reached for me with elongated fingers. I swallowed a scream that threatened to escape. My skin prickled with cold sweat, and my mind fought to anchor itself against the rising tide of panic. I was alone, utterly alone, save for the distant voice of the host crackling through the intercom. "Remember the rule," the voice said, smooth and cold as ice. "Don't move." The words echoed in my skull, a mantra and a threat. But who was the host? The puppeteer pulling the strings behind this nightmare? The question gnawed at me more than the fear of the punishment. Was this some elaborate game, or something far more sinister? I shifted my gaze, careful not to move a muscle. The hallway behind me had shifted again. Doors that had been there moments ago were gone, replaced by solid walls. Ahead, a faint light pulsed, beckoning and cruel. I wanted to run, to flee the claustrophobic maze, but the rule held me prisoner. Minutes passed, or was it hours? The mansion's heartbeat echoed through the walls. a rhythmic pounding that matched my own. My legs trembled, aching to move, to step forward, to escape this torturous limbo. But the moment I considered it, a chilling thought struck me. What if the punishment wasn't just teleportation? What if moving here meant losing more than freedom? What if it meant losing myself? The shifting corridors were more than physical traps. They were psychological ones. The mansion was rewriting the rules of reality, warping my mind as it rearranged its walls. I felt the cold grip of paranoia tighten around me. Every creak, every whisper of movement in the darkened halls was a threat. Every shadow could be the mansion itself, watching, waiting. Suddenly, a low rumble shook the floor. Dust fell from the ceiling in a gentle cascade. I held my breath, muscles locked in place. The mansion was alive, and it was toying with me. I thought back to the other contestants, all gone now, victims of rules broken or mysteries unsolved. Their absence was a constant reminder of the stakes. I was alone, trapped in a maze that demanded I stay still while the world shifted beneath me. The host's voice returned, this time with a hint of amusement. "You are learning, but the game has only begun." I clenched my fists, trying to steady my ragged breath. The walls around me began to slide again, slow and deliberate, enclosing me in an ever-tightening cage. The rule echoed in my mind like a cruel joke. How do you survive when survival demands movement, but movement means death? I closed my eyes, willing myself to focus, to find calm amidst chaos. My senses sharpened. I felt the faintest breeze whisper past, carrying the scent of damp earth and something metallic, blood. The mansion was alive with secrets, and I was its only witness. As the walls settled into a new configuration, I dared to open my eyes. The corridors stretched ahead, unfamiliar and unwelcoming. The challenge was clear: to endure without moving, to survive in a prison that shifted with every heartbeat. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a spark of defiance burned. The mansion may control the maze, the rules, even the very walls, but it had not yet broken me. I took a breath and prepared for the next shift, knowing that every second still counted, even when I could not move. I don't remember when the whispers started, but by the time I reached the 6th room, they were a constant hum beneath the pounding of my own heart. The walls here were narrower, the air heavier, as if the very essence of the mansion was pressing down on me, suffocating. The rule was simple, cold in its cruelty: don't trust. It was a rule unlike the others. Before, I'd managed to understand the rules as boundaries: do this, don't do that. Silence, sight, touch, these were tangible, physical. But don't trust was a poison that seeped into the mind, corroding every thought, every instinct. It wasn't just a rule, it was a sentence. I sat on the cold floor, my back against the cracked plaster, replaying the fragments of memories I'd been trying to suppress. Mara's face hovered before my eyes, sharp, fearful, her voice barely a whisper as she leaned close in the darkened hallways. "Watch him," she'd said once, nodding toward Jesse. "He's not what he seems." I'd brushed it off then. Jesse's easy grin, his careless confidence, had seemed like a relief from the tension that clung to the others. But now, alone in this room, those warnings echoed louder than any voice. I remembered the way Mara's eyes had darted nervously, how she flinched when Jesse approached, and how, later, she vanished without a trace, swallowed by the mansion's cruel rules. The shadows shifted around me, and the house creaked with unnatural groans, like it was alive and watching. Then, through the haze, a vision flickered. No, not a vision, a memory or a trick of the mind. I saw the host, that spectral figure who had greeted us with calm menace at the start. His face was mostly hidden in shadow, but his eyes gleamed with a cold amusement that sent a shiver down my spine. He stood before a wall of levers and screens, manipulating the mansion itself. The rooms twisted and turned at his whim, the rules bending and breaking like brittle glass. I realized then that this was no simple game or reality show. We were puppets dangling on strings, forced into a labyrinth of shifting logic and cruelty. A sudden noise snapped me back, a faint whisper from somewhere below. The basement's voice, I thought, the place where those who broke the rules were sent. But this whisper was different, urgent, warning me to beware. I ran my fingers along the cracked wall and felt the rough grooves of carved letters, uneven and bleeding down with dark stains. "Don't trust," they read. The message was etched like a brand, a permanent scar marking this room's essence. My mind reeled with the implications. If trust was forbidden, then every gesture, every word, every glance was a potential trap. I was alone now, but the ghosts of the others haunted me, not just in memory, but in this room's suffocating presence. I thought back to Jesse's smirk, the way he'd whispered false promises, the way he'd turned on Mara in that hushed confrontation. Their voices had been low, trembling, but the betrayal was clear as a scream in the silence. Tears stung my eyes, but I wiped them away. There was no room for weakness here. The mansion was a beast that fed on fear and doubt, and I was its prey. I clenched my fists, feeling the roughness of the floor beneath my nails. "Don't trust," I repeated to myself, a mantra and a warning. But if trust was the enemy, then who was the ally? Could I even trust my own judgment anymore? The walls groaned again, the air thickening as the mansion seemed to pulse with a dark heartbeat. Somewhere, far below, a door slammed shut, echoing through the bones of the house. I stood, swaying slightly, the weight of solitude pressing down like a physical force. The game was no longer about survival. It was about betrayal, about becoming the thing I feared most. A cold smile ghosted across my lips. If the host wanted betrayal, I would give him the masterpiece of deceit. I stepped forward, deeper into the room, ready to play the game on my own terms. But even as I moved, a thought gnawed at me. If the host controls the rules and twists trust into betrayal, is any alliance or certainty possible within the game? Outside, the mansion waited, its walls watching, its rules shifting like shadows. And I was the last piece on a board designed to break me. The game was only just beginning. I stood alone in the suffocating silence of the mansion's twisting corridors. The rule leapt into my mind like a curse echoing relentlessly, "Don't survive." It wasn't just a command, it was a sentence. The air around me felt heavier, charged with a malevolent energy that seemed to seep from the very walls. Every instinct screamed to run, to escape, but I was trapped in a nightmare that defied logic. The mansion pulsed, walls breathing with an almost organic rhythm, warping and shifting as if alive. My footsteps faltered, each movement threatening to trigger some unseen punishment. I remembered the others, once vibrant, hopeful, but now just shadows in my memory. Voices whispered from the basement below. Faint murmurs rose from the darkness beneath me, a chorus of despair that chilled my blood. I leaned over a cracked railing, peering down into the abyss where the punished were sent. Flickering lights revealed ghostly figures, contestants I had known, their faces pale and eyes hollow, trapped in a limbo between life and death. Their whispers clawed at my sanity, fragments of warnings and pleas. "Don't trust the game," one voice rasped. "It's not what it seems." I swallowed hard, heart hammering. The mansion was no mere game. It was a prison designed to break us, to erase us. But what did the rule "don't survive" truly mean? How could survival itself be forbidden? Suddenly, a figure materialized before me, translucent and trembling. It was Claire, the contestant who vanished in the second room. Her eyes searched mine desperately. "They want us to give up," she whispered, "to stop fighting. But the host feeds on our surrender." Her form flickered, fading with the weight of her final words. I clenched my fists, resolve hardening. If surrender was the game's victory, then defiance had to be mine. I descended the narrow staircase to the basement, the air growing colder with each step. The walls were scarred with frantic scratches, names, dates, desperate messages from those who had come before. The dim lights cast long shadows, revealing faces twisted by fear and despair. Among them, I saw flashes of hope, brief moments where someone had resisted. The basement was both tomb and testament, a graveyard of broken wills. "You cannot win," the host's voice echoed suddenly, cold and omnipresent. "Survival is not your right here." I turned, heart pounding, but saw no one, only the oppressive darkness closing in. But I would not yield. "I refuse," I said aloud, voice steady despite the terror. "I will survive." The mansion shuddered violently, walls bending and twisting in impossible angles. Reality itself seemed to warp, the rules unraveling like threads pulled from a tapestry. For the first time, the game faltered. And in that fracture, I glimpsed a way forward, one that might lead to escape or entombment, but a choice nonetheless. The breaking point had come, and with it, the chance to rewrite the rules on my own terms. But at what cost? The mansion waited, breathless and hungry, as I prepared to face whatever horrors lay ahead. The silence returned, heavier than before, as if the mansion itself was holding its breath. I could feel the weight of every vanished contestant pressing down on me, their fates entwined with mine. The game was no longer just about obeying rules. It was a battle for my soul, my very existence. Every shadow seemed alive, every creak a whisper of warning. The impossible rule haunted me, a paradox I could neither escape nor fully understand. Yet, in that darkness, a fragile hope flickered. I was still here. I was still fighting. And perhaps, just perhaps, survival was still within reach. But the mansion was watching, waiting to see if I would break. And I wasn't sure how much longer I could hold on. I pressed forward, steps tentative but determined. The basement's secrets whispered to me, a riddle wrapped in shadows. The host's voice echoed again, colder this time, threaded with amusement. "You defy the rules, yet they bind you tighter than ever." I shivered but did not stop. Somewhere deep inside, I knew that to survive meant embracing the betrayal, the shifting logic, the madness itself. The game was not just a challenge, it was a crucible, and I was its last flame. Outside, the night deepened. Inside, the mansion's heart beat slower, waiting for the final move. I took a breath, steadying myself against the impossible. The breaking point had command. Survival was the only rule I would refuse to break. The game was far from over, but so was I. I stood before the final door, the iron gate looming like a sentinel of doom, its cold, rusted bars etched with one simple, terrifying command: "Don't leave." The words felt like a noose tightening round my throat, a cruel paradox that twisted my mind. After everything, the silence, the darkness, the shifting maze, the betrayal's eye had made it here. The last room, the last rule, but this one was different. It wasn't just about breaking a rule and being punished. It was about the choice between freedom and oblivion. The mansion seemed alive, its breath heavy and stale. the flickering shadows on the peeling wallpaper dancing like ghosts of the past. The whispers from the basement reached a fever pitch, a chorus of pleading and despair that clawed at the edges of my sanity. I could almost see the faces of those who had vanished, their voices begging me to turn back, to stay, to join them in that endless darkness. I reached out, my fingers trembling as I brushed against the rusted bars. The cold bit into my skin, sending a shiver up my arm. Behind me, the air shifted. I turned sharply, heart hammering, to find the host standing there silent, unnerving, his porcelain mask reflecting the dim light with an eerie gleam. His black suit blended seamlessly with the shadows, making him seem less a man and more a spectre, an embodiment of the game itself. Without a word, he gestured toward the gate, the unspoken invitation clear: choose. Escape and lose everything, your memories, your identity, your very self, or remain trapped, a ghost in this endless manor, forever haunted but painfully aware. My mind reeled. The rules, the lessons flashed like lightning. Don't speak, the first cruel command that set this nightmare in motion. Don't look, the darkness that shattered trust and sanity. Don't touch, the isolation that fractured bonds. Then the whispers that shredded my mind, the shifting maze that defied reason, the betrayals that broke my heart. Each rule was a piece of a puzzle, each punishment a thread in the tapestry of madness. And now, this final, impossible test. I took a deep breath, the stale air filling my lungs as I steadied my shaking hands. The mansion pulsated around me, walls rippling like water, floors trembling beneath my feet. Reality itself seemed to fold and twist, the line between the game and nightmare blurring until I didn't know what was real anymore. The host remained silent, his presence a cold weight on my back. I could almost hear the whispers growing louder, their voices weaving through my thoughts like a siren's call, but I wasn't ready to surrender. I closed my eyes, recalling every moment, every rule, every betrayal. The game's shifting logic wasn't a trap, was a test. A twisted, cruel test designed to break us or make us something else entirely. I stepped forward, feeling the gate tremble beneath my touch. The whispers erupted into a cacophony, the mansion groaning and creaking as if alive, its walls closing in like the jaws of a beast. And then I remembered the key. Not a physical key, but the knowledge, the understanding. The betrayals I had witnessed, the rules I had bent without breaking, the trust I had destroyed and rebuilt in my own mind. The game wanted me to lose myself, to become a shadow like those below. But I was still here. I was still fighting. With a sudden surge, I pushed against the gate, the iron bars giving way with a screech that echoed through the halls. Light flooded in, blinding and pure, washing away the shadows and whispers. I stepped through, but the game was not over. The mansion shuddered violently, the ground beneath my feet cracking open to reveal not freedom, but a deeper darkness. The host's voice, cold and distant, whispered through the chaos. To leave is to lose all. To stay is to live forever. Choose wisely. I realized then the true horror. Escape would erase me, strip away my memories and identity until I was nothing. To remain was to be trapped, but to keep myself intact, imprisoned in this nightmare. The choice was mine. Tears blurred my vision as I took a final breath, my heart torn between hope and despair. The mansion's walls closed in, the whispers rising once more, and I stepped forward not toward escape, but into the unknown. Because sometimes survival means embracing betrayal, embracing the unknown, and becoming something new. And as the darkness swallowed me, I whispered back to the voices below, I am still here, I am still fighting, The game had changed, and so had I.